Grace Thompson woke before dawn in the small town of Hollow Creek, where mornings were quiet and the air carried the smell of pine and old memories. Her house sat at the end of Maple Road with peeling white paint and a porch that creaked under gentle footsteps. She was 59 years old, and life had etched itself softly into her face, not with bitterness, but with endurance. She moved slowly through her kitchen, making coffee the same way she had her decades, because routine was the only thing that kept her steady. Outside, the sky was pale and empty, waiting for the sun to decide whether to rise with kindness or indifference. Grace worked at a nursing home 20 minutes away, where she cleaned rooms and sat with residents who had no visitors. She had learned that loneliness had a sound, and she could hear it in the silence of the hallways. Some days, she felt like she was cleaning more than dust. She was collecting forgotten stories and unspoken grief. She spoke to the residents as if they were family, because many of them had been forgotten by theirs. They called her Angel sometimes, and she always smiled, though she never believed it herself. She had once dreamed of a different life, a life filled with laughter and noisy dinners, and a husband who would come home tired but smiling. That life had existed once, long ago. Her husband, Samuel, had been a mechanic, with hands rough from work and a laugh that could fill a room. They met at a county fair when she was 18, and he had won her a stuffed bear that still sat Samuel had won her a stuffed bear that still sat on the shelf in her bedroom, missing one eye and holding more memories than fabric. They married young, built their life slowly, paycheck by paycheck, mistake by mistake, but always together. When their daughter Lily was born, Grace believed her heart had finally found its full shape. Lily had Samuel's eyes and Grace's quiet sensitivity. For years, the house on Maple Road was filled with bedtime stories and scraped knees and soft lullabies sung in the dark. Then, one winter night, everything broke without warning. Samuel was driving home late from the shop when black ice sent his truck sliding into a ditch. The call came just after midnight. Grace remembered the way the phone felt heavy in her hand and how the room seemed to tilt as if the world itself had lost balance. Samuel was gone before she reached the hospital. In one night, she became a widow, and Lily became a child who learned too early that life does not ask permission before it changes. Grace did her best to hold everything together. She worked extra shifts, packed lunches, helped with homework, and cried only in the shower so Lily would not hear. As Lily grew older, she became quieter, more distant, as if building walls she did not know how to explain. By the time Lily left for college, she barely spoke about her feelings at all. When she moved to another state after graduation, she promised to call every week, but weeks became months, and months became silence. Grace never blamed her. She told herself that Lily was building a life, and that space was part of love. Still, the silence hurt in ways she never spoke aloud. Every night, she checked her phone before bed, hoping for a message that rarely came. Every birthday, every holiday, she set an extra place at the table just in case. Years passed, and Grace learned how to survive inside the quiet. She volunteered at the nursing home because sitting with forgotten people made her feel less invisible. She listened to their stories, held their hands, and whispered comfort when families did not come. She understood them because she too knew what it felt like to wait for someone who might never arrive. One evening, as she was finishing her shift, she noticed a new resident sitting alone by the window. He was older than most, with silver hair and tired eyes that carried sharp awareness beneath their weariness. His name was Henry Walker, and he had been a school teacher for over 40 years. Grace brought him a blanket and asked if he needed anything. He smiled gently and said, "Only conversation, if you have time." Grace sat with him longer than she planned. Henry spoke about his life, his students, his love for books, and his wife, Margaret, who had passed away 3 years earlier. He said the hardest part of losing her was not the absence, but the echo she left behind. Grace felt something stir inside her chest because she understood that echo too well. Over the next weeks, she began visiting Henry every day after work. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing quiet laughter and long silences that did not feel empty. For the first time in years, Grace felt seen, not needed, not pitied, but truly seen. Henry never rushed her, never asked questions she was not ready to answer. He listened with patience that only comes from a life fully lived. Slowly, Grace found herself opening pieces of her heart she thought were sealed forever. She spoke of Samuel, of Lily, of the nights she sat alone wondering if she had failed as a mother. Henry would nod and say, "Love never fails, it just changes shape." One afternoon, Henry handed Grace a folded piece of paper. He said, "I wrote this years ago, but never shared it." Grace unfolded it carefully. It was a letter Henry had written to his daughter, apologizing for the distance that had grown between them over the years. He had never sent it. Grace felt tears rise as she read the words, because they mirrored everything she wished she could say to Lily. Henry looked at her and said, "Maybe it is not too late for either of us." That night, Grace went home and sat at her kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper. She stared at it for a long time, afraid of what might come out. Finally, she began to write. She wrote about missing Lily, about understanding her need for space, about loving her without conditions. She did not accuse or beg. She simply spoke from her heart. When she finished, she folded the letter and placed it beside her phone. Her hands shook as she hesitated. Then she took a deep breath and sent a photo of the letter to Lily. Days passed with no response. Grace told herself she had done what she could. Then, one evening, her phone buzzed softly. It was Lily. The message was short but heavy with emotion. "I read every word, Mom. I'm sorry I disappeared. I did not know how to come back." Tears streamed down Grace's face as years of waiting finally cracked open. She replied slowly, "Take your time. I am here." From that moment, the silence between them began to break, little by little. Messages turned into calls, calls turned into long conversations, filled with laughter and tears, filled with years that did not feel empty. Lily admitted she had felt lost and afraid of disappointing her mother. Grace told her she had never been disappointed, only worried, only loving. As Grace rebuilt her connection with Lily, she continued visiting Henry, who watched her with quiet pride. He said, "You look lighter." Grace smiled and said, "I think hope found me again." Henry nodded and said, "It usually does when we're brave enough to open the door." One crisp morning, Lily surprised Grace by calling and saying, "I'm coming home, just for a few days." Grace could not speak at first. Her heart felt too full for words. When Lily arrived, they hugged for a long time, holding on to each other as if reclaiming lost years. The house on Maple Road felt alive again, filled with voices and shared meals and memories being rebuilt. Lily met Henry one afternoon at the nursing home and thanked him for helping her mother find her voice again. Henry smiled and said, "She did the hard part herself. I just reminded her she deserved to be heard." As seasons changed, Grace realized her life had not ended when Samuel died, nor when Lily left. It had simply paused, waiting for her to find the courage to keep going. She continued working at the nursing home, not because she had to, but because it mattered. She continued loving without fear, because she knew now that love does not disappear when it hurts. It waits patiently for us to return. And in the quiet evenings on her porch, Grace would watch the sun set and feel something she had not felt in years. Peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of meaning. Grace woke the next morning with a strange feeling that her life had shifted into a new season, even though the calendar insisted it was still the same week. Lily was asleep in the old bedroom down the hall, the one with pale blue walls and a window that faced the backyard. Grace stood quietly in the doorway, watching her daughter breathe, feeling a mixture of gratitude and fear, because love always carried both. She stepped back softly, not wanting to disturb the fragile peace that had returned. Over breakfast, they spoke gently at first, as if learning the sound of each other again. Lily talked about the city, about the long hours at work, about how easy it was to disappear inside ambition, and how hard it was to admit loneliness when surrounded by people. Grace listened without interrupting, remembering how many years she had wished for this simple moment. She told Lily there was no deadline on coming home and no test she had failed by leaving. Lily reached across the table and held her mother's hand and said, "I forgot how safe it feels here." That afternoon, Grace took Lily to the nursing home. She wanted her daughter to see the place where she spent so much of her heart. The residents greeted Grace warmly, and Lily watched with quiet awe as she saw how her mother moved through the halls with calm purpose, touching shoulders, remembering names, remembering stories. Henry was sitting by the window, reading when they arrived. He looked up and smiled at Grace, then at Lily. Grace introduced them, and Lily thanked him again, this time with more confidence. Henry said, "Your mother has a rare strength. She stays gentle in a world that teaches hardness." Lily smiled because she finally saw what Grace had been all along. As days passed, Lily stayed longer than she planned. She helped around the house, cooked dinners, and walked with Grace in the evenings along Maple Road. They talked about Samuel, about grief, about the way silence can grow like a wall when no one knows how to speak first. Grace admitted she had been afraid to reach out because she did not want to pressure Lily. Lily admitted she had been afraid because she thought leaving meant she had broken something forever. Together, they learned that love is resilient when given honesty. One evening, Lily asked Grace if she had ever considered leaving Hollow Creek, starting over somewhere else. Grace thought for a long moment before answering. She said, "I used to think staying meant I was stuck. Now I know staying meant I was rooted. This town held my pain, but it also held my healing." Lily nodded, understanding that sometimes running is not the same as moving forward. At the nursing home, Henry's health began to decline, slowly, quietly, the way candles burn lower without drama. Grace noticed the change in his voice, the way he tired more easily, the way his eyes lingered on the window as if memorizing the light. One afternoon, he asked Grace to sit with him longer than usual. He said, "I think my time is growing shorter." Grace felt her chest tighten, but she did not look away. She held his hand and said, "You are not alone." Henry smiled softly and said, "Neither are you anymore." Henry asked Grace to promise something. He asked her to keep telling stories to the people who had been forgotten and to keep believing that small kindnesses could change entire lives. Grace promised through tears. He then asked her to call his daughter, whom he had not seen in many years. He gave Grace a number written carefully on a scrap of paper. Grace hesitated, but Henry said, "Please." Grace made the call that night. Henry's daughter answered with suspicion in her voice that slowly softened as Grace explained who she was and why she was calling. There was a long pause, then a quiet sob. She said, "I did not think he wanted to see me." Grace said, "He never stopped loving you." 2 days later, Henry's daughter arrived. The reunion was quiet but profound, filled with apologies and hands held tightly as if time itself could be forgiven. Henry passed away one early morning while Grace sat beside him reading softly from a book he loved. His last words were simple, "Thank you for seeing me." Grace cried, but her tears were not only grief, they were gratitude. She knew she had been part of something sacred. Lily attended the small service with Grace, standing beside her mother with a steady arm. Afterward, Lily said, "I am proud of you, Mom." Grace felt those words settle deep into her soul. Life continued as it always does, with days that demanded getting up and nights that asked for reflection. Grace kept working at the nursing home, now with Henry's promise echoing in her heart. Lily decided to take a leave from her job and stay in Hollow Creek longer, helping her mother and volunteering at the home as well. Together, they created routines, new memories, and shared laughter that felt like a second chance. One evening, as summer approached, Grace and Lily sat on the porch, watching fireflies dance in the dark. Lily asked, "Do you think we get more than one purpose in life?" Grace smiled and said, "I think purpose changes as we do. Sometimes it is to build, sometimes it is to survive, and sometimes it is to help others find their way." Lily leaned her head on her mother's shoulder and said, "I think you found yours." Grace closed her eyes, feeling the truth of that settle gently. In the quiet of Hollow Creek, where grief had once felt permanent, Grace now understood that pain does not define a life. What defines a life is the courage to remain open to love, even after loss. And as the night wrapped the house on Maple Road in soft darkness, Grace felt certain of one thing. Her story was not about what she had lost, it was about what she chose to give. Understood. I will continue smoothly with the next section, keeping the same rules. No commas, no headings, smooth emotional flow. Autumn returned to Hollow Creek, with soft gold leaves drifting across Maple Road, and Grace felt the rhythm of time differently now, not as something that chased her, but as something that walked beside her. Lily had settled into a quiet routine, helping at the nursing home in the mornings and working part-time at the town library in the afternoons. The two women shared dinners most nights, talking about ordinary things, recipes, neighbors, memories, and plans that once felt too fragile to speak aloud. The house that had echoed with absence for years now carried warmth again. Grace noticed changes in herself that surprised her. She laughed more freely. She slept more peacefully. She no longer checked her phone with dread, but with calm expectation. Loss still lived inside her, but it no longer ruled her. She had learned that grief could exist alongside gratitude, and that loving again did not erase the past, but honored it. One afternoon at the nursing home, a new resident arrived named Ruth Miller, a quiet woman with sharp eyes and trembling hands. She refused to unpack her belongings and would not speak to anyone. The staff struggled to reach her, and some had already labeled her difficult. Grace recognized the signs immediately. This was not anger. This was fear. Grace sat outside Ruth's room each day, reading softly without expecting a response. She spoke of the weather, of the birds outside, of small moments that did not demand anything in return. After several days, Ruth finally spoke, asking, "Why do you keep coming back?" Grace answered, "Because everyone deserves to be remembered." Ruth turned her face away, but a tear slid down her cheek. From that moment, Ruth allowed Grace into her world, slowly, carefully. She spoke of losing her husband, of being placed in the home by distant relatives, of feeling discarded. Grace listened with the same patience she had learned through her own pain. Lily watched her mother work with Ruth and felt a deep sense of respect growing stronger each day. As winter approached, Lily received an offer to return to her old job in the city with better pay, and winter settled fully over Hollow Creek and snow wrapped Maple Road in quiet white stillness. Grace stood at the window one early morning, watching Lily scrape ice from the car windshield. Lily was leaving for the city again, not because she was running this time, but because she was choosing with clarity. They had talked long into the night about it. Lily promised she would come back often. She promised she would call. Grace believed her, not because of words, but because of the way Lily now looked at her with honesty and love. At the nursing home, Ruth began to smile more. She joined group activities slowly at first, then with growing comfort. One afternoon she told Grace, "You made me feel human again." Grace held her hand and said, "You always were." Lily continued volunteering even after returning to the city, visiting on weekends, sitting with residents, listening to stories just like her mother had done for years. The kindness had become something shared, something passed forward. Time moved gently. Seasons changed again. Grace aged quietly with Grace. living fully in the present without fear of the past. She visited Samuel's grave on his birthday, placing fresh flowers and speaking softly about Lily, about the life that had grown beyond loss. She felt peace, knowing love had not ended, it had only transformed. One evening, Grace sat alone on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in soft amber. Her phone rang. It was Lily, calling just to talk, just to hear her voice. Grace smiled deeply as she answered. In that moment, she understood something simple and powerful. Life does not promise us forever. It promises us moments. And sometimes, if we are brave enough to stay open, those moments become everything. Grace looked out at the quiet road, the same road that once felt like an ending and now felt like a beginning. Her story was never about tragedy. It was about endurance, kindness, and the quiet strength of a woman who chose love again and again, even when it hurt. And if this story touched your heart, please like, comment, and subscribe because stories like this deserve to be shared.